Intro to the series, Redacted Magic and the Fairytale Code. Welcome back. I'm Adeline Atlas, 11-time published author, and this is the Symbolism series. Today begins our sub-series, Redacted Magic and the Fairytale Code. You've been told that fairy tales are fantasy, children's bedtime stories, imaginative fiction from a more primitive time, useful for entertaining kids or teaching simple moral lessons. But that's not what they were. At their core, fairy tales are encrypted magical systems, oral spells, cautionary rituals, and spiritual transmissions hidden inside a framework of story. They were never meant for children, and they were never fiction. They were instructional blueprints for how energy works, how spells are cast, how transformation occurs, and how the human soul navigates through challenge, danger, power, love, and awakening. What we call a fairy tale today is often a redacted, edited, sanitized fragment of something much older, deeper, and more spiritually dangerous than the versions found in children's books. In this series, we are decoding these fairy tales not as literature, but as magical texts. This isn't literary analysis. This is spiritual forensics. Because embedded in these stories are real mechanics: how curses work, how transformation is triggered, how identity can be hidden or stolen, how portals open and close, and how names, numbers, objects, and archetypes hold power. Once we learn the code, the entire genre shifts from entertainment to revelation. Let's begin with the basics. What is a fairy tale? Traditionally, the term refers to short, folkloric stories involving magical or fantastical elements: enchanted forests, witches, beasts, curses, talking animals, and moral tests. But this surface definition is deceptive. The oldest fairy tales predate written language and were preserved orally for thousands of years. Scholars like Jack Zipes and Stith Thompson trace many core tales to Bronze Age motifs, long before the Brothers Grimm ever recorded them. And these stories weren't invented. They were carried. Passed down from grandmothers to children, from tribal elders to the next generation. They were ritual storytelling devices, living memory systems, that encoded everything a culture needed to remember: cosmology, transformation, taboo, temptation, energetic danger, lineage secrets, and spiritual laws. In oral cultures, storytelling wasn't entertainment. It was teaching. Before there were books, stories were the primary vehicle for encoding and preserving metaphysical knowledge. Just like indigenous songlines or West African griot traditions, fairy tales served as encrypted oral memory maps. They taught survival, law, transformation, initiation, and protection. They explained the invisible world through narrative. And to the trained ear, they taught magic. So how did we get from that to this? From tales of blood magic, cannibal witches, enchanted sleep, and transformative death, to happily ever after? The answer is deliberate redaction. Magic was edited out of these stories through a systematic cultural process that involved colonization, Christianization, industrialization, and the rise of the nation-state school system. As literacy became formalized and moral instruction replaced oral wisdom, fairy tales were rebranded for children. The same stories once told as night warnings and spiritual preparation rituals were cleaned up, sanitized to fit the emerging values of Western bourgeois society. Where once there were witches and severed limbs, now there were kind animals and gentle moral metaphors. The stories didn't lose their power accidentally. Their transformation was deliberate. Take the Grimm brothers, for example. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm didn't invent their tales, they collected them. But even they, in compiling their famous Kinder- und Hausmärchen collection, edited, reworded, and censored many of the original versions over time. Their first edition, published in 1812, was violent and deeply magical. In some stories, evil mothers became stepmothers to protect the image of motherhood. Incestuous kings were edited out. Blood rituals, curses, and demonic trials were softened or removed altogether. And as their books were reprinted, each new edition became more child-friendly, less threatening, and more aligned with Christian moral instruction. In short, less magical and more moral. This redaction wasn't isolated to the Grimms. Across cultures, as oral traditions were absorbed into written and state-controlled education systems, folk stories lost their metaphysical edge. Indigenous cautionary tales, Norse and Slavic myth, Middle Eastern jinn lore, African trickster stories, all were colonized, reinterpreted, or discarded entirely. The result is that most people alive today have never heard the real stories. What we grew up with, whether it was Disney or children's books, is the post-redaction version. We were handed fantasy, stripped of its spiritual coding. So what was lost? And more importantly, what remains? What was lost were the overt symbols of magic: transformation through pain, death as initiation, blood as a portal, enchantment as energy manipulation. The idea that witches weren't just villains, they were initiators, challengers, and sometimes holders of spiritual truth. That objects like apples, mirrors, cloaks, and spinning wheels weren't props, they were energetic tools. That characters weren't fictional people. They were archetypes representing stages of spiritual evolution or energetic danger. And that places, like the forest, the castle, the well, or the tower, weren't just locations. but energetic coordinates used to signal internal states or dimensional thresholds. What remains are the fragments, the symbols, the bones, the clues. And if you know how to read them, you can reverse engineer the magic that was removed. That is what this series will do. We are going to teach you how to read a fairy tale like a magician reads a spell, dissecting the components, recognizing the symbols, and restoring the original function. To do that, we'll be examining fairy tales not through their plot, but through their spiritual architecture. That means we'll look at symbolic objects, like apples, needles, roses, and mirrors, what they do energetically. Energetic structures, like towers, forests, staircases, and bridges, how they signal thresholds or initiations. Archetypes, like the maiden, the crone, the beast, the witch, the trickster, what roles they play in your inner and outer world. Spells and curses, what triggers them, how they're lifted, and what they symbolize about spiritual blockage or transformation. Numerology and triads, the role of 3s, 7s, and 12s in magical patterning. Naming and speech, how naming something or not naming it grants or removes power. Time and duration, why 100 years of sleep, why 3 nights of testing, why the clock strikes midnight. We will also compare these patterns across global traditions. While this series focuses on Western European fairy tales, many of the core magical mechanics are universal. For example, the motif of a dangerous forest as a trial space for spiritual development is found in Celtic tales, Slavic myths, and even Native American stories. The magical mirror appears in Chinese mythology and Persian literature. The binding power of names shows up in Jewish mysticism and Egyptian rites. These aren't just local legends. They're fragments of a larger magical language. One of the most important takeaways from this series is this. Fairy tales were not created by one people or one author. They are not fiction in the modern sense. They are living cultural artifacts that preserve energetic and spiritual truths, often against enormous odds. And even when their overt content has been stripped away, the symbols remain. These symbols still activate. They still carry charge. That's why these stories continue to resonate. That's why children intuitively love them. That's why they still get adapted into films, series, books, and reboots. The deeper meaning still hums under the surface. In the next 3 videos, we will continue this introduction by covering 1. Why magic was hidden in fairy tales. 2. The Grimm brothers and the sanitized spell. And 3. How to read a fairy tale, symbol decoding, and magical vocabulary. These 3 videos will equip you with the tools to decode story-like spell and recognize magic in plain sight. Only then will we begin the case studies, where each tale will be treated as an energetic initiation and decoded in full. Because the stories weren't fiction, they were instruction. And now, we remember. Hi, I'm Adeline Atlas. 11 times published author and School of Soul has just released one of our most requested deep dives, the Magic and Occult series. This series is not for the faint of heart. It's for those who know there's more going on beneath the surface, behind the media, behind the family, behind the system. This series breaks the spell and hands you the map. The Magic and Occult series includes over 200 videos on 1. Entertainment or ritual. Decoding mainstream media as mass spellwork. 2. Occult families. Spot them. How generational magic and ritual lineage hides in plain sight. 3. Occult symbolism. The signs, seals, and signals used to claim, curse, or command. 4. Esoteric symbolism. Layered meaning, sacred geometry, and encoded messages. 5. Law is magic. How contracts, courts, and language are rituals of power. 6. Spells and spirits. What magic really is, and what happens when you use it. 7. Covens and lodges. Where modern ritual happens, and who's involved. 8. Destiny swapping. How rituals steal timelines, talent, or soul contracts. 9. Energy harvesting. Spiritual parasitism, and how to seal your field. 10. The clairs. Your intuitive senses. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and more. 11. Become magical. How to strengthen your gifts, protect your mind, and wield conscious force. 12. Miracles are real, divine intervention, faith portals, and supernatural reversals. 13. The chosen ones. What sets them apart and why they're always targeted. 14. The black sheep, the generational breaker, often isolated by design. 15. Targeted individuals, spiritual and technological targeting of aware souls. 16. Gang stalking, organized spiritual and psychological warfare. This is the most revealing, most spiritually advanced, and most protective series SOS has ever released. If you've ever felt something was off about this world, this will confirm it, and prepare you for what comes next. Your protection begins with knowledge. Join the SOS School of Soul Vault.